That's better.
That won't last long.
We'll take it while we can get it.
There you go. Okay, Kelly, have you come in by phone yet?
Yes, I'm here, Mike.
Okay, very good. And it's now 2:01 Eastern time. And I can see Mr. Velt, Mr. Hogan, Dunn, and the town is on the telephone. She just spoke up. So I am declaring that we have a quorum for this meeting. As noted on the agenda.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, can we just wait to confirm that we're live, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I just sort of
Okay.
thought, I figured I was.
Hold on just a minute.
If I was here.
Waiting for confirmation.
You are live. It's
Okay.
Donna.
Thank you.
I'll start over. We have Mr. Velt, Mr. Hogan, Mr. Fun are on video. I'm on video, and Ms. Howell has called in via telephone. Ms. Howell, could you speak up for just a moment?
Yes, this is Kelly Howells. I'm with you.
Thank you. That was because we didn't think we were live when you first checked in. With that,
I understand.
I'm declaring that we have a quorum present, and we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which would be additions to the agenda. I don't know of any additions to the agenda at this point. And hearing none, moving to item number 3, which is closed session. The agenda has already indicated that we're going to move to a closed session and then return back to open session. We're estimating 30 minutes for the closed session. And we will have matters to address, and we will be returning to closed session. Returning to open session. With that, the board will now consider whether to meet in closed session to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice and consult with staff on potential or pending litigation as permitted by section 3305 B7 and 8 of the general provisions article. Meeting in closed session would allow the members of the board to seek and obtain legal advice with board counsel without waiver of the attorney-client privilege. May I have a motion to meet in closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Moved. Seconded. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion having passed, the board will meet in closed session in accordance with sections B7 and 8 of section 3305 of the Open Meetings Act. As I've noted to our those who may be listening in, we will be returning back to open session, and we estimate 30 minutes for the closed session. With that, I would ask the appropriate personnel to leave this session and go back into, we will then meet in the closed session. So with that, thank you. Okay. There it is, buddy. Okay. There's Mr. Bell. There's four of us.
That's about the extent of it, isn't it?
It is.
Kelly is
Are we live?
on the road again.
Yes, we are live.
We are live. With that in
I
mind,
think we might be missing, I don't see Linda or Donna.
no, I don't see Linda or Donna. We'll wait a minute or two.
I am without camera. This is
I
done.
frequently don't see
Okay,
people on
so
this
you're the
thing
black
anyway.
screen. Okay, thanks.
I'm without camera just for a moment. Trying to
Yeah.
calm my system down here. I'm overloading it.
I hope the storm doesn't punch me out.
Is a storm coming in?
Oh yeah, it's really raining down here. It's really coming down. Yeah. Bit of wind and a lot of rain.
Oh, wow.
Thanks for sharing with us, Bill.
Malcolm, I'm getting to know you're a troublemaker.
What?
Yeah, you.
What?
I think we have a Zoom scheduled together with Dr. Smith on Monday.
Yeah, 12:30, I believe.
Right.
Hey, Linda's here. You ready to go? And are we live? We are live. Okay. At this time, I am recalling the open meeting of the State Board of Elections back to order. And I am noting that we have four members, including the chair, present by video. Ms. Howe, one of the members who was here earlier, has extenuating circumstances, and she will not be attending the remainder of the meeting. However, the number of members that we have is sufficient for a quorum and sufficient to do business. With that, we want to turn to the, in some ways, primary agenda item, which is the November election discussion. And at this time, I think we wanted to begin, Nikki, with a sort of a little bit of a general overview about sites and staffing. You ready?
Yes, thank you. So just in light of the governor's proclamation on Monday, authorizing the use of vote centers on election day, just wanted to bring you up to speed as to where what we've been doing over the last 2 days. Understanding the state board's request to use high schools, Donna and the rest of us have been working with the local boards to determine, first of all, what's a public high school, which was a little bit more challenging than we initially thought, and seeing what those facilities are like and whether they are acceptable for voting purposes. So that process is ongoing. And we will continue to work with all of the local boards as to whether the public high schools are adequate. And if not, what's another alternative location for that. And then how they're staffing them. So we will continue to get updates on recruiting of election judges and their ability to staff those locations. So we will, over the next several weeks, this is one of those tasks that we need to move relatively quickly on. We will be presenting to the board the various locations for those vote centers and have the local boards available to answer specific questions about those locations.
Okay, very good. Does any, so I should bring my camera back up here. There we go. Does anybody have any of the board members have any comments or questions at this point?
Mr. Chairman, this is PJ. I'm sorry, Nikki, if I missed it. Are we giving them a date certain? We need that information back.
So we haven't yet. Yes, part of it is going to be driven by when you all are scheduled to meet next, which, some of the counties might be ready next week. Some of the others might need a little bit more time. So at this point, we have not given them a deadline. We are meeting with them collectively tomorrow to talk more about this and get a sense of where they are in the process and, what is their time need, and then what, of course, is our time need to present them to you. So you didn't miss it. I didn't address that, but we are aware that we need to check in with them tomorrow and see where they are.
And just for clarification, what I would like to see is a complete listing at some point of all 24 jurisdictions where they're, just the name of their early voting centers, each of them, and their high school or civic center or other facility they're going to be using for election day. And I got to presume that they want to know that. Everybody wants to know this as soon as possible.
Yes. So I think what you'll likely see is you'll see them start trickling in at the next board meeting. It will need to get all of them before we can do that full list, but I think you'll start seeing them county by county. Hopefully at the next meeting, we'll have some to present to you, and then we can just keep aggregating the list.
Great, thank you.
And
Go ahead.
go ahead, Bill.
No, sir, you go first.
And Nikki, do you need a deadline in order to get the proper publicity out to advertise and publicize where the voting centers are going to be to the voters and get all this information out publicly?
So we are just in the process of kicking off our voter outreach campaign. So I don't know that there's a date certain that they need it by, other than we all just need it very quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to add to what PJ said. I agree with it. And I just know that a lot of times when we get like the early voting sites that we're looking to approve, there's a nice presentation that's made usually that talks about the population around it, how they reach these decisions on, are they reaching all the demographics possible in their county, and how have they done that? And is it ADA compliant? What's the parking like? Is public transportation available? Is it accessible? The convenience to voters. So how they reach their decision making, so that we can have a good idea that we are serving the maximum amount of voters possible in every demographic possible in each county.
Our plan is to present as much of that as possible for each of the locations.
Great. Thank you.
And I would want to make one other comment about the number of sites. We've talked about the early voting sites. We've talked about the excellent idea of using the high schools. I want to make it clear for myself, I don't presume to speak for all members. These are a floor, they're not a ceiling. We want as many voting sites as possible. Now, the early voting is in a different category. And I think it would be safe to say that we expect the various jurisdictions to use all the early voting sites they have available. Beyond that, when they go to the election day voting centers, I believe that certainly my expectation, and I believe the board's expectation, is that every jurisdiction will attempt to maximize the number of voting centers that they deploy. And they should not think of themselves as, oh, well, we only have X number of high schools, so we only need X number of voting centers. That's not true. You need the number of voting centers that you can staff and are appropriate to the task. So do not think in terms of these numbers as maybe that was it, as a ceiling. I think I got it reversed when I first said it. Don't think of them as a ceiling. They are a floor. We hope and expect that you will, in many jurisdictions, exceed those numbers. And I believe it's on election day going to be critical to have this maximum effort, what we can possibly make work in action. So I wanted to make that comment so that my position is clear when the various jurisdictions come in. And as other board members have noted, we want to know what the decision-making process was. That my position is going to be clear as to what more can you do? Why could you not have done more?
And
So,
Mr.
yes, sir.
Chairman, I'd like to add on to what you've stated. Perhaps in the past, jurisdictions may have had maybe one or maybe two early voting sites. Because of the circumstances and not being able to have full number of voting sites on election day, perhaps they may want to consider having where they may have had one in their jurisdiction, they may want to have two. And where they may have had two, they may want to have 3 or 4 early voting sites and centers. So whatever they've had in the past, they may want to increase that during the early voting time, since the number of sites for voting will be decreased on election day in and of itself.
Andrea?
That's all.
I would just, I guess, remind the board that the early voting sites, the number of early voting sites is established by statute. There is some flexibility of jurisdiction. In some cases can seek an extra one. And I don't know, sitting here right now, I don't know which jurisdictions have taken advantage of that or not. But if the board wishes to, it has already in the last meeting or one of the last few meetings extended the deadline for certain jurisdictions that wish to take advantage of an increase in population, since the statutory and regulatory deadline for establishing how many early voting sites a county is entitled to. That's been extended to August 15th, if I'm not mistaken, based on action taken at the last board meeting. The board can, also, if it wishes, consider more broadly, to the extent a jurisdiction has not taken advantage of the additional voting center to which they might be entitled as an early voting center, considering whether the deadline should also be extended for local jurisdictions to avail themselves of that opportunity. But I don't know how many would qualify in that case.
Thank you, Andre. I think what people should be hearing, jurisdictions should be hearing from my comments and Mr. Fund's comments, is that we would be, I will just say I would be appalled if a jurisdiction did not use the maximum number of early voting sites it had available. And I see Mr. Fund is endorsing that notion. As well as Mr. Hogan. So if any jurisdiction out there needs a sense of how the board feels about this, I think you've just seen it and heard it. And we're going to be taking this particular issue very, very seriously. And as Mr. Hogan pointed out, we're going to want data, and we're not going to just want raw data. We're going to also want people to be ready to justify the data they present to us.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, not to be redundant or belabored, but I think just to remind everyone, obviously the more ballots people mail in, the better off we are. the more people vote early, the better off we'll be on election day. So, I mean, if they want to reduce, if you know, none of us want long lines on election day. So the more opportunities they can give people for early voting, I think is better.
To that point, Mr. Chairman, this may be, as we're discussing the November election, a good time to bring up a discussion around how many days of early voting. The proposal was to go from 10/29 to 11/3 straight through, 6 total days. I'm of the feeling that was, as you placed several times, that was a floor, not a ceiling. I'd like to have some discussion around how many days we have, to PJ's point, to spread that voting over as many days as possible, to increase that, and maybe even to increase the hours and to allow like same hours as election day, like 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. or something like that each early voting day. And so I'd like to throw that out and see where my colleagues stand on the number of days and the times.
Mr. Chairman, to that question, I am in support of 8 days. That's what has historically been. Exactly when those days are, I'm open to discussing further. Like, for instance, I guess I need to work backwards. I think our plan was on election day for all these high schools and or other facilities to be open, in addition to the early voting centers. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the early voting centers need to be open on November 3rd. I guess it's semantics. Do we call that early voting when it's on election day? So we either work 8 days back from that or 7 days back from that, 7 days including, November 2nd. If staff feel, based on their discussions with LBEs, technical staff, past experience, should the early voting sites not be open on the Sunday before election day, which would be November 1st? I'm open to that, but I think there should be 8 days of early voting.
I think that you raised 2 interesting issues. The first issue that struck me is more of a lawyer issue. When we have early voting centers, and the early voting centers handle early voting before November 3rd. And then, I guess kind of, at midnight, they're no longer early voting, but we are maximizing voting centers on that day and deploying hundreds and hundreds of voting centers, of which the former early voting centers become more voting centers. I think that's it's going to be an issue for attorneys. Although I love the idea that you can't be an early voting center on election day. By definition, you would become a voting center. But it has a real world application in that if this board makes a determination that we're going to, and the locals believe they can support this, that we want to maximize the amount of time we use in early voting, then obviously we certainly don't want to count election day as an early voting day. We would want to count it back the day before and then backward from there for the number of days we want to use. So it does make a difference, but I believe that the answer is going to be when you get to election day, you're not early voting anymore. You're just a voting center, and people can go there or go other places. The question for how many days, and I believe from comments made now, that perhaps what we want to do is direct staff to provide us dates for the early voting, which, as Mr. Hogan pointed out, take into account technical issues, obviously from the local boards, that they have the resources to do certain things. Because we're going to move in, I believe we'll be moving in lockstep on this throughout the state. There won't be differences in jurisdictions as to early voting dates. And the state staff's understanding of what we can actually manage. So I believe what we need at this point is, we all know the time is of the essence in virtually everything we're doing now as the State Board of Elections. But I think everybody's aware that we need this, but we also need input. The state staff has to interact with the locals so that we get a good number that's going to come up. So in that vein, Chair would entertain a motion to direct the staff of the State Board of Elections to provide a recommended range of dates for early voting to the State Board as soon as possible for approval.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add in it to make sure it would be a minimum of 8 days. I believe the present statute says it has to be 8 days of early voting.
Is there a minimum on the?
So the current, this is Nikki, the current law has 8 days of early voting. So I guess my question in the motion is it 8 days of early voting plus election day or 8 days of voting?
And this is going to have to be consulted with the board's attorney, who really had no reason to think about this kind of dancing on the head of that particular pin. So I understand what Mr. Fun is saying, and that, you know, what I think we all want as a board, I think we all want it as a community, an elections community, is the maximum number of days that can be sustained in early voting. And I think that's probably what's the most we can do, because we're not interested in the least.
And Mr. Chairman, we'd also like to have in that the recommendation on the times for opening.
I said that again.
The recommendation on the times for opening. I would be in favor of matching that all the way through. I mean, in general, I would be in favor of the maximum number of days of voting. I would prefer them to be consecutive. If possible, technically, I would like their, if let's say it was 8 total, whatever it is, 8 days, whatever, I'm happy with that. If the times match, so our messaging that went out was very clear, and it was, you start to vote on this day, here's election day. It would be easier if you could vote each day up to that and the hours were the same all the way through election day. I think it would help on messaging and confusion.
I agree with you. Any other board comments? Any other board members?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly to that.
So
we want to make it as easy, as simple as possible, and maximum effort, maximum opportunity to vote.
Yep. And so the chair would invite a motion for the state board, the staff, to present to the state board as soon as possible the recommended start date of early voting, the end date of early voting, and the hours of early voting.
Mr. Chairman, before you get a motion, David
Yeah.
Garris from Mayo is on the call, and while we plan to discuss this and their recommendations in response to your motion at tomorrow's election directors meeting, I just wanted to let you know that he is available in case you would like to ask him questions or hear from him.
Okay, that's good to know. And I mean that seriously. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Garris? Does he have anything he wants to comment on right now? I assume somebody's texting back.
I'm sure he does.
Okay. If there's no objection from the other board members, then we'll hear from Mr. Garris. Mr. Garris? Or not?
Hello, this
Okay.
is David Garris. Can you hear me?
Oh, there-
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. So first off, glad that the governor gave us the proclamation for vote centers. However, that said, we're now within 90 days of election day. It's critical for the local boards of elections that we make definitive decisions regarding the conduct of the election now. So I would urge the State Board of Elections in your power, to address these issues is to make a decision today so that we can begin planning and implementing your decisions right away. Continuing to delay and making changes that they may seem minor or easy to implement is going to have effects that the local boards need time to deal with. So I'd urge you with all possible, if at all possible, please make a decision today regarding any of your motions. Regarding Bill's discussion about the hours, I know the local boards agree. We find that if we're able to say 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day of election for early voting and election day, they would agree with that. So if that change can be made, running the election through election day, there's another point that we agree with you on that. I think, Bill, that was something that you mentioned, and the effect of that could be that so that we would run the election from the 26th, I guess, if you wanted to do 8 days of voting. However, I would caution you that the local boards need to know this right away, because we do have, we're not the only people that are using these buildings. We have to coordinate with the school boards and with the other agencies that own and operate these facilities, as well as in some cases private facilities where voting is taking place. So if you're going to change the dates, we need to know right away. We can't kind of keep shifting it again and again and again. So I'd urge you, please make that decision today. So if it's the 26th through the 2nd of November, I believe, is that correct? Or 3rd of November?
it would be to the 2nd of November as early voting.
Mm-hmm. So early voting would run the 2nd, and then November 3rd would be election day.
Correct.
Yes. And along with that, if you're going to do that, then also keep in mind that the more days we add, the more election judges we need to hire. So that exacerbates the problem that we were fixing by reducing the number of early voting sites. So keep that in mind as you consider these changes, please. So can I answer any questions or?
So I have a question, if I could, for Mr. Gary.
Sure.
Would one is how big of an issue is each day? So in other words, if we had 8 total days versus 9, is that a big help to the local boards, or is really 8 and 9 the same?
I think 8 days for the local boards would be preferable, because we're still dealing with the fact that we're losing staff. And by staff, I mean election judges. In fact, you have to be cognizant of the fact that we're still dealing with COVID-19. In fact, I know there are instances where local board employees have now been tested positive with COVID-19. So this is something that, the more days we're open and the more people we bring in as staff members, the higher the risk that you're going to have a local board where all of your staff has to shut down for 2 weeks or quarantine itself for 2 weeks. So if you're going to extend it, the local boards would feel 7 days plus election day for 8 days total.
So you want to change it to 7 days early voting?
The local boards, if you're going to extend early voting, do 7 days plus early vote plus election day. So if I'm doing my dates correctly, that'd be the 26th of October through November 2nd would be the early voting period, plus November 3rd as election day.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Trento. Does the board have the authority to set early voting to 7 days versus 8 at this time?
The statute, it doesn't say 8 days. It just refers to when early voting starts and when early voting stops. And right now it says beginning the second Thursday before a primary or general election, and continuing through the Thursday before the election. So the board, under the authority granted by the governor's order that was renewed in June, allowing agency heads to modify timeframes, deadlines, dates at which things need to occur, the board has the authority to move those dates around or to suspend the effect of those dates and put something in their stead. So the board does have that authority. I just want one thing that David mentioned about the time. He said it'd be 7 days starting on the 26th. Just so it's clear, I count 7 days inclusive starting on the 27th. So it'd be Tuesday the 27th through Monday the 2nd is the 7 days.
Mr. Chairman, this is Lynn. I think we probably should be looking at 8 days plus election day.
Okay.
Which is October 26th through November 2nd for early voting, and then election day, November 3rd.
And what are the recommended hours?
7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so Madam Administrator, we have your recommendation, and the tech folks are okay with running it straight through. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Mr. Garris, why the 1 day change? Why the shift from the 26th to the 27th for 7 day early voting?
Well, a couple reasons. As I said, the more you extend the days, the higher the risk or the increasing risk that you're going to eventually have your staff or an early voting site contract COVID-19. Somebody there is going to get sick. So,
Well, if we use
what's the recourse when one of your early voting sites, when one of the election judges at one of the early voting sites says, "I'm sick, I've tested positive." Do we shut it down? Do we move it? It's kind of like what happens when the Royals or the Orioles or the Cardinals have, or the Marlins have a player who gets sick. They lose 8 players. So every time we open up and every day that we operate, just keep in mind that you're increasing the odds that one of your election judges is eventually going to say, "I'm sick, I've got COVID," and then we have to quarantine that whole site. So so it's a risk minimization strategy at that point.
You indicated you had a second reason as well.
Yes, the availability of the facilities is also going to be called into question. We have to, it's all tied together, but we do need to make sure that the locations themselves will be available for 9 days, 8 days.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is PJ. I appreciate that, Mr. Garris. 2 points. I hear you on the risk mitigation and not to be flippant, but we go the extreme and say, okay, then we shouldn't be open at all, but then there's no risk mitigation, or we should only have 1 day of early voting. That minimizes. But obviously, yes, I hear you. The more days are open, the more risk there is. As far as the facilities availability, if we didn't have COVID, if there was no pandemic, these early voting centers would be open for 8 days, actually starting before October 26th, because they are open for 8 days and they shut down for a couple days before the election.
We're booking them a year in advance.
Right. So last November, when you booked them, we didn't know about COVID. So I assume you booked them for 8 days, the normal early voting period.
Unless some of the sites have moved around. Some of the LBEs I'm hearing from right now are saying that their sites have moved. So.
Okay, I think this is why we were looking at the state staff getting the information in and the local boards providing solid figures. What you started out by saying was you need to make a decision now. But what you're telling us is, and I agree with Mr. Hogan about the issue of the 1 day as far as the minimization of risk. Why not 2 days? Why not 3 days? Why not 4 days? Once you get into that kind of a thought pattern, there's no real, well, this 1 day will make a difference type of result. But you're starting out by saying we need to make a decision today, but you're finishing by saying, well, we're not really sure about some of the sites or the amount of time we have, and Mr. Hogan pointed out, well, you would have booked these in advance. And you're saying, yeah, but you're hearing that some of the areas have shifted. So we started by saying we're willing to give you guys an opportunity to give us something firm, but you wanted the decision today. We give you the decision today. I mean,
well, respectfully, we did give you our recommendation in writing in 3 different letters, the 29th through the 3rd. But if we have to add locations and times, then the 27th through the 3rd.
26.
other board members, thoughts?
It does make me, this is Bill, it does make me think that when we might already have it, and maybe I haven't seen it, is to have a policy on if we have somebody at a vote center that does test positive during, what is our strategy to sanitize the vote center? Who has to be quarantined? And then do we have backup judges to come in into sanitized location? We should have that strategy in writing and implement it out by guidelines to the local board. So that's a sidebar to this, but I do think that's important that we know what to do if it happens.
Good. Excellent point. Excellent point. But it is an excellent point. It's going to make it sound like I don't think it is. It's an excellent point. You're absolutely correct. But what we are asked to do right now is to make a decision about 7 days versus, I think the only real difference is 7 days versus 8 days. Unless I missed something else along the way.
Mr. Chairman, this is PJ. To help, we need to move along. I'm happy to make a motion to have establish early voting as October 26th through November 2nd from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Are you making that motion?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second that, Malcolm Fun.
Any discussion on the motion? All right. Those in favor of that motion say aye.
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 And I believe that is 4-0, supermajority, motion passes.
Mr. Chair, since this does require action pursuant to the governor's order, I think you should also move to direct the staff to prepare the notice that needs to be submitted to the governor, indicating the suspension of the timeframes and the modification of the timeframes that have been adopted by the board. You recall that the board's action will go into effect 24 hours after notice is provided to the governor, and the notice is provided to the public on the board's website.
May I have such a motion as described by council?
So moved, Malcolm.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, aye.
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 Motion is approved. Excuse me, staff is directed as indicated by council.
I have one other question. How are we dealing with, and do we have to do an emergency regulation change on address changes now as it applies to election day? Does Nikki or Linda have a thought on that?
So I assume you mean because same-day registration and address changes are allowed during early voting, but not on election day? Yeah,
Right.
I think we're going to need to talk. That's one of those issues we have to work through. I don't have an answer for you today.
Since they're voting centers, it adds, right. Thank you.
Just a moment. We have two other things I think we need to discuss under this particular topic. One is the proposed voting centers and their staffing. And I believe Mr. Hogan actually might have already brought this up earlier. But do we want to direct the local boards to submit their proposals to the administrator on a schedule that she coordinates, and then to the state board for approval? Thoughts?
This is PJ. I defer to others. I don't know that we need a motion on that, but, directing, the administrator and staff to work with the county, the LBEs, and get us that full information of the voting centers as soon as possible. Sure, they're already working on it. I hope they are.
On a schedule determined by the administrator
Sure.
and for board approval. All right. And this is directing not merely the state staff, but also the local boards themselves, correct?
Yes.
In this motion. All right. So the motion is to direct or the motion, the chair would entertain a motion to direct the local boards and the state staff to develop a list of the proposed voting centers and staffing on a schedule determined by the administrator for approval by the state board. That covers everything. May I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0 supermajority. Next item is the canvassing. And we had, in our last meeting, received a letter from Montgomery County, specifically addressing a request about canvassing. And we have, I know that this has not been ignored by our staff, but at this point, I think it would be appropriate, and the chair would entertain a motion to direct the state staff to establish a canvassing date in coordination with local boards for the state board approval.
So moved.
Second.
Move it second. Doug, do you have anything? You look like you were looking something.
Just a quick, we're not establishing a date right now at this moment.
No, because it's going to require the local boards and the state staff to coordinate that date.
Just want to make sure. Okay.
Just directing the boards and the state staff to, in fact, establish that starting date, the range of dates for canvassing.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's been moved, it's been seconded, discussion is concluded. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. And with that, I believe, unless someone else has something that I don't have on my list, a personal list, that ends item 4 of the November election discussion. Did I miss anything? Yes, Mr. Hogan.
Sorry.
We'll see you.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. It's like being in school, raising my hand.
Actually, with the video, you know, I mean, I can just tell it's like being in a regular board meeting. I can tell from the bottom.
I just want to be clear, understanding on the drop boxes. And I listen. Well, let me first. Linda and Nikki, I thought, did a phenomenal job this morning at the Board of Public Works. And so we have 75 drop boxes currently, according to my notes from this morning's BPW meeting. Is that right, Nikki?
Yes, that's correct.
And 52 on order
Yes, that's
for a
correct.
total of 127.
Yes.
As you pointed out this morning, the Board of Public Works, in the primary, June 2nd, the drop boxes were very well received, used by, I think, 15% of the voters. I expect they're going to be used even more, especially given the latest news about the Postal Service. Do we have any limitations? I mean, probably the limitation is what the vendor can produce and what we can afford to buy. But is 127 drop boxes enough with the low? And I know, I'll preface this by saying, I know we have some policy/regulation about, you put a drop box, it's got to be secured, it's got to be, by, on video camera or by security guard in a secure location. And I'm sure there's some limitations on that. But like, do the LBEs want more than 127? I mean, could they deploy according to the requirements more than 127? Can we buy more than 127? Can the vendor produce more than 100? I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but I really do think the drop boxes are going to even be more wildly popular. And again, there's another item that cuts down on lines, cuts down. I consider to Mr. Garris's concern earlier, I consider the drop boxes the ultimate risk limitation.
So lots in there, right, to unpack. So we have an election director's call tomorrow, and we have the ballot Dropbox question on the agenda to ask whether they have the capacity for more. So we've also asked the vendor about their capacity to provide us more. Obviously, that's we need to act fast. But we also, for the reasons you said, the surveillance, but also the ability to twice a day empty those boxes. That is a resource intensive effort for the local boards of elections. And so that's part of our conversation tomorrow is, do you have the capacity for more? And again, what's the timing for the vendor for us to get them? And then what is our schedule to deliver them? We have been talking about setting them up approximately 30 days before Election Day. So to have them all available then, it's probably, the vendor timeframe is very tight for that. And then, then we're back to, we have some ready this day, we have some ready this day, and then our messaging gets challenging. But those are all things that we're happy to respond to if we know that the local boards have the capacity to support more and if the vendor can provide more. I think I covered most of your questions.
You did,
Okay.
yeah. You can tell my general feeling is as many drop boxes as we can get and the LBEs can deploy.
Okay. Any other matters relating under that general heading of the November election discussion? Okay, hearing none, I believe our next item then will be agenda item 5, proposed regulation changes. And is Nick going to handle that, Nikki, or you?
I will. So you had a email yesterday with some proposed regulations attached. I apologize for the late delivery. There are 5 sections with proposed changes. You have seen 4 of them before because you adopted the same changes for the primary election and I think even the special general. So I will be happy to go through them. The first change, the first regulation in that document is actually the new one, ironically. So what this change does is it authorizes the local boards of elections to the option of conducting some of election judges training remotely. That's clearly a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we want to give them the flexibility to allow for remote training of election judges. The remaining changes are all the ones that you've seen before and approved for the primary election. The 330801 so this is the canvassing, the local board, the board members themselves, that board, the entity, allowing them to participate, requiring that they be present, whether that's in person or virtually, for the start and end and for decision meetings in the canvass, but allowing that the canvass of vote count occurs under their supervision, but they don't need to be present. And that's a function of if you have 30 days of canvassing, the ability to convene your board for all of those is a challenge for the board members. And this was how they conducted it in the primary without issue. The proposed changes to 331103, we're still in the absentee ballot section. This is allowing that the current regulations require that every ballot envelope be date stamped. And it's from the special primary, we learned that was a bottleneck. And so the proposed change was to allow them to, require that they start date stamping the day before the election and then continue through. So no need to date stamp at the beginning, but starting in this case, November 2nd through, the ballot envelopes would be date stamped, but do require that they store the ballots in a container that has the date they were received. So there is a way to determine what date they were received. And that process was in place, as I said, for the June 2nd election and worked well. The proposed section, we're still in 331103. This is the returning of the ballots. We made some changes in the primary to accommodate the use of the ballot drop-off boxes, which we've just been talking about. And this just adopts this for the general election so that they are authorized to be returned there and also included and defined in what is a timely ballot. So they would have to be deposited in that container before the polls close on election day. So those are identical concepts to the primary. And then the last, I think this is the last one. The last one is a change to early voting and election judges, allowing that the local boards can support the opening and closing of early voting centers remotely instead of in person. I think that worked well in the primary. And so we just wanted to continue that to give the local boards a little bit more flexibility and not require physical presence at these sites. So I'm happy to answer them. There's not a cover memo like usual. I just put the explanation in the document itself, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on these. Oh, and I would ask that we would like to adopt these as emergency so that we can have them in place for the general election, which means that they would expire after the general election unless we repropose them permanently. And a couple of them we might, but we don't need to do that today.
I have one question. Under 33801, I understand, I thought we had made in the primary the other change that said that for the canvass to continue, the video had to be on and working and broadcasting.
So you had that, the board made that as a motion, as a policy. It was not adopted in regulations. And so that policy continues to stand unless you repeal it. And well, we'll have to go back and look. If it was just for the primary, then we would need you to re-adopt it for the general, but you did it as a policy rather than a regulation.
Okay, so if you could check that to find out for the next meeting, if we need to adopt that as a policy again or not. I have no other questions.
Any questions or comments? Can we vote on all of these at one time? Or do we need to vote on each regulation individually? In other words, if we have a motion, for 330203.
I think you can, if you list them all, then I think you can do them as one motion and just list all 5 changes. Are you comfortable with that, Andrea?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
The chair would entertain a motion to amend. Is the word amend?
I think it's adopt, right? We adopt these changes.
You're adopting the proposed amendments.
Changes to 330203, 330801, 331103, 331103, 331705, as set out in the documents which have been publicly made available and which the board has had an opportunity to review. May I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I get 4?
Aye.
Everybody votes aye?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
The motion passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Is there any other matter relating to agenda item number 5, the proposed reg changes? Hearing none. Next item on the agenda is old business. Is there any old business?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring up something that was brought to my attention. When I'm sure it comes on old business when we talk about the application for requesting a mail-in ballot. A number of years ago, if you applied online for an absentee ballot, at that time it was called absentee ballot, you could fill out the form online. Today, you have to print the form. It's in PDF form. You have to print it, fill it out, and mail it in. Is there some way that we can make this website friendly, that people, when they access the application, they can fill it out and mail it in that way?
So yeah, we're getting ready to post the form that you approved last week. And one of the requests was to make that be a fillable PDF. So you could
Okay.
type in the information and then print and sign it and send it back.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other further old business? Hearing none. Agenda item number 7, new business. Does anyone have new business to bring to the board? Hearing none. Agenda item number 8, disclosure of campaign contributions. Does anyone have any campaign contributions to disclose?
I have one for a nonpartisan school board election. Is that reportable since it's nonpartisan? Hello?
Yeah.
I have to look at the bylaws to see whether it says partisan contributions or just contributions.
Somebody that's smart to answer the question.
Better safe than sorry.
Just report it and don't worry about
Okay,
it.
don't worry about it. Okay, I'd like to report a $100 donation to Antoine White for the Calvert County Board of Education, School Board.
Thank you, Mr. Fun.
Thank you.
Any other disclosure? All right. Now, we actually have 2 items, as it were, for this. Right now, we have a meeting which had been tentatively set for Friday, August 14th. And I don't believe we're going to need that meeting, simply because I don't think anything's going to be ready for us unless staff tells me differently. And they're not telling me differently. All right, so I am canceling the August 14th meeting. So that's off the calendar. I believe we should meet next week. If there's nothing, then I imagine staff would tell us that they have nothing to bring before us. But I expect we'll have at least some information, and we may want to consider it as a board, even if we take no actual action on the information. So I would like to set a meeting for next week if there's no objection. How do we look for, and I'll pick Thursday at 2, and we'll start from there.
Mr. Chairman, this is Linda. I have a governing council meeting for the Election Assistance Commission of the Department of Homeland Security on Thursday afternoon. It's part of the critical infrastructure process, and I would like to be able to attend that. It starts at 1 and goes to 4 on Thursday.
Okay. So I would say either Thursday morning or Wednesday afternoon. I hate to set meetings on Fridays if we can avoid it.
Wednesday afternoon is fine. Thursday morning is really busy for us. We have a staff meeting and then an election directors meeting and then an election planning meeting already scheduled.
Fair enough. Or having just said that I don't like Friday meetings, we'll be better off scheduling it for Friday.
I can't do Friday.
There we go. That is that. Okay, see, it was easy.
I can do Wednesday at 2:00.
Okay.
Does the staff believe that that there will be sufficient business to bring before the board by the 19th? Or is that too early?
I don't think anybody's sure, but I would note that that's a week from today. So we're meeting a week from today.
We should have some, I would think, location information from the local boards, at least the smaller ones we could probably present. And so I would say do Wednesday.
Okay.
I can do Wednesday.
You doing? Malcolm, how about you?
I should be back by the time. I have ophthalmologist appointment at 11. Yeah, I should be back by that time. Yeah, 2:00 Wednesday.
All right. So we'll set it for 2:00 on Wednesday, the 19th of August. Okay. And again, for everyone concerned, our meeting on Friday, this Friday, the 14th, is canceled. We now have a new meeting set for Wednesday, the 19th at 2 p.m. All right. And with that action being done, that was a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved, second,
Second.
and seconded. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned. And thank you all very much. for
Thank you,
everything.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to the staff.
Staff, thank you.
I'll take care now.
Thank you.
All right.